Well, hey guys, welcome on back for another tutorial video, which is going to show you how to go about calculating a frequency table as described and taught in my statistics course. Now, this is a comprehensive frequency table, which is going to include your normal, usual column of frequency, also followed by cumulative frequency, which tells you how many scores are at a particular score, below it or above it, depending on how you set it up. Also going to show you how to calculate the cumulative relative frequency column as well as the relative frequency column. Okay, so as you see on my paper, I have my data set at the top, and my data set consists of 3 6s, 4 5s, 3 4s, 2 3s, and 1 2. Okay, so our number on purpose is a bit odd, and I wanted to use an odd number so that you can see how the percentages would probably pan out if we were using something other than 10. Okay, so the first thing that we want to do in calculating our frequency table is just create a raw score column that shows the occurrence or the indication of a score within a data set. Okay, so we know that 6 shows up in my data set, right? So we got 6 listed below. We know that 5 shows up in my data set, so we want to make an indication of that score in that column. We know that 4 shows up, so we make an indication of that score. 3 and 2. Okay, so that's the first thing that I recommend you do is set up your raw scores within a column. Okay, and I did it in a descending order, but you can do it in any fashion that you choose. There's no set rule to how you go about doing this, as long as you're consistent in your calculation across the different columns. I would recommend that you do it in descending order, with the highest number starting at the top of the page, and then as you move down the page, it's in descending order. Okay, now the next column is going to be my frequency column, and I'll delineate that with an F. So F stands for frequency, and I'm going to put that to the right of my raw score column because that X stands for raw scores. Okay, so looking at my data set, I realize that I have 3 6s in my data set, so I'm going to put a 3 right there. Okay, so this means 3 6s occur within this data set. Looking at my data set again, I notice that I have 4 5s, so I'm going to put a 4 down here, and I have 3 4s, so I'll list 3 4s. I have 2 3s, so I'll list 2, and then I have 1 2, right? So I'll list that next to the lowest indicator score in my data set, a 1. Okay, so that is my frequency column. Okay, pretty straightforward. I imagine that you're not having a tremendous amount of trouble calculating that column. Your trouble is probably coming from the cumulative frequency column, or the CF column. So the cumulative frequency column, guys, again, it tells me the amount of scores that are at a particular score and below it. Okay, and how we're going to go about calculating that column is by starting with my lowest indicated score, which is 2, and going over to the frequency column as it pertains to that 2. So I know that 2 shows up 1 time in my data set, so I'm going to bring that 1 over here to start my cumulative frequency column. Okay, and what that cumulative frequency tells me is the amount of scores that are at a particular score and below it. So that tells me that 1 score is at 2 and below it, right? So that tells me what I can see up here as well. All right. So the reason why we're calculating this table is so that we can easily be able to eye this table and get quick information. And depending on the size of our data set, this may be a bit troublesome and tedious. And this is why we want to create this frequency table. So from there, what we want to do is systematically add up the frequencies as we calculate a cumulative frequency for each particular indication of score. Okay, so 1 plus 2 gives me 3. Okay, so do you see what I just did there? That 1 that was right here for this 2, I moved that 1 over there, and then what I did was I moved up and added this 2 that relates to this particular score, this frequency. I added that to this to give me that 3. Okay. And that tells me that there are 3 scores at 3 and below it. Okay. And you can tell that that's the case because there's 2 scores at 3 and there's 1 score at 2. And we all know that 2 plus 1 is what? 3. Right? So that's how I got the cumulative frequency for that particular indication of score. Okay. Now I can continue using that strategy to get the cumulative frequency for this particular indication of score over here. Excuse me, this one. Okay. So 3 plus 3 will give me 6. Okay. An alternative method that you can use to get your cumulative frequency for this spot, and it equates to the same thing, but what you can do is, if you want the cumulative frequency for this particular indication of score, then you would simply add up all of the frequencies that pertain to this score and below it. Okay, so if I want this box, I just move to my left and I'd add 4 plus 3 plus 2 plus 1, which will give me 10. Okay. So you can use the zigzag method if you want to, after you drag over the frequency for the lowest indication of score, meaning you can go 1 plus 2, which gives you 3, and 3 plus 3, which gives you 6. Or you can say to yourself, I know that if I want the cumulative frequency for this particular number, I know that I need to add up all of the frequencies at that particular number and below it. Okay. So either way works. However you want to conceptualize it is fine, as long as you accurately complete the problem. Okay. So let's continue calculating our cumulative frequency table. 10 plus 3 will give us 13, right? And then we're done. Okay. So you know that your cumulative frequency table, or this column rather, is accurate when your last number equates to your sample size number. Okay, so just to recap, n, which means sample size, for this data set is how much? Okay, well, let's see. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13. So 13. Okay, and 13 and 13 means that thumbs up, we've done right. So that's my cumulative frequency table. I know that there are 10 scores at 5 and below it. Okay. All right. Now let's move on to our relative frequency column. Relative frequency. So we're basically going to take the information that's listed here, and it's going to be presented in percentage format here. Okay. But in order to do that, it's important that we convert these frequencies into percentages. Right now, they're just raw numbers giving us a raw amount of times that these numbers appear within the data set. But if we wanted to take it a step further and make it into percentages, maybe for the sake of putting together a pie chart, we need to convert these numbers into percentages. Okay. So how would we do that? Well, a simple formula to remember would be F divided by N, and then of course remember to round. Okay. Remember to round, or to take your decimal 2 places over to the right. Okay, so F stands for frequency and N stands for sample size, and you calculate that percentage for each indication of score that you see here. Okay, so let's try that with 2. We have 1, so the frequency of 1 for 2. So take 1, place it over 13, and that's going to give us 0.0769. Okay. Now, remember to round, meaning that we still need to take this decimal over 2 places. So if we did that, we'd end up with 7.69%. Okay. I would go ahead and round it up. Just for this data set, I'd go ahead and round it up to 8%. Okay, so what that tells me is about 8% of this data set is 2. Okay, 8% of this data set is 2. Or one case out of the sample size of 13 is 2. All right, so it's telling me the same information just in percentage format. Now we do the same thing that we did for 2. We do that for 3. So we have 2 divided by 13. Which gives us 0.1538. Okay, we take that decimal 2 places, and that gives us 15.38%, which I would go ahead and round to 15%. Okay. Let's do the same thing for 4. So we got 3 divided by 13. Which gives us 0.2307. If we round that, take it 2 decimal places, we get 23.07. And then if I rounded it further to a whole number, I get 23%. Okay? Let's do that for 4 again. I mean, not again. Excuse me. But we're going to do that for 5, right? So we're going to take the frequency for 5. So we bring 4 right here over 13. 4 divided by 13. Four divided by 13 gives us 0.3076. Take it 2 decimal places, we get 30.76%. Take it 2 decimal, not take it 2 decimal places again, but round it to a whole number, we get 31%. And then lastly, 6 has a frequency of 3, and we've already done that calculation here, right? So we can just bring this percentage up here. So we got 23%, bring it up here. And that is our relative frequency column, okay? Simple way to go about calculating that. And again, that's telling us the information that is in this column in percentage format or in proportion format. Cumulative relative frequency column. So it's giving us information that we have here in percentage or proportion format. Okay, so the same way we went about calculating our cumulative frequency column with zigzag rounding, starting with the lowest indication of score, moving that frequency over to the right, then adding up those scores systematically as we go up this chart, computing it. We're going to take that same strategy and use it for this particular column. Okay, so we start with 8%, and 8 plus 15 is 23%, and 23 plus 23 is 46%, and 46% plus 31% is 77%, and 77% plus 23% is 100%. Okay, so you know that you got your cumulative relative frequency column correct if you get to 100% once you finish your calculations. Okay, so just to recap again what we did with that cumulative relative frequency column, we brought the frequency in percentage format for 8% over to the right. Okay, and then we systematically added up our frequencies moving up the indication of scores. Okay, so 8 plus 15 gave us 23. 23 plus 23 gave us 46. 46 plus 31 gave us 77. And 77 plus 23 gave us 100%. Okay, So that 100% is indicative of the fact that we are taking into consideration this entire sample. It represents, in a numerical fashion, this entire sample. And now looking across these 4 columns, we have a lot of information that we didn't have just from eyeballing this. Okay. We now have a lot of information right off the bat. If we wanted to know about outliers, we would have that information. If we wanted to know percentages as it pertained to certain scores, we would have that information. If we just wanted to know the bulk of where people's scores fell, we have that information as well, thanks to our CF columns and our CRF column. Okay. So that is the gist of this tutorial. I hope that it was extremely helpful. As always, email me if you have any questions, comments, or concerns. Take care.